Greetings to everyone who has joined us today on the most powerful platform for truth, bar none, anywhere on God's green earth. This is your platform for education, elevation, and edification. This is the Red Pill Diaries. And I'm your host, your brother, and your friend Rashid. As we await Carl to join us in the booth, I want to just talk to you for a minute before we go into all of these different issues. But before I do that, I want to thank everybody who will join us and who has joined us on Rumble, Odyssey, Twitch, Twitter. Well, Twitter we just got knocked off, so not Twitter. Locals and the Red Pill Diaries and our sister channel, which is the Red Pill Journals. Please, everybody, please, and Carl is in the booth. Please, everybody, go and subscribe to all of the channels. I'll bring Carl in just a second. He's in the booth right now, but I want to say this. So I did this little experiment um, a few days ago. I called up a few family members and also my children. I said I just got to see because I know I give YouTube a hard time because they're always stopping my growth. And I said, so hold on, I want to do an experiment. So I had about all in all about 12 people subscribe. I wanted to see what would happen. And I said, go to a video and hit like. They did it, and within 20 minutes, the likes were gone. And also, on top of that, all of the subscribers were deleted. All of them. So I know now that this is, without a doubt, without a shadow of a doubt, a quiet or a covert censorship of the show and to prevent the growth of the show. This is actually happening in real time. So I see Carl in the booth, so I'm going to bring him in the booth now. So everybody, welcome Carl. Hey Carl, how's it going, my friend?
Hi, Rashid. Good to see you again.
Yeah, man, it's good to see you. I was just saying that I did an experiment to see if YouTube was really taking my numbers, and they like took them. And so there's no doubt about it that it's a stealth censorship on this platform. But I'm okay with it, Carl, because I have friends like you that don't mind joining me. And as long as we can reach one person, to me, that means everything to me because that's one less lost person out there, and they can see what's going on. So with that said, Carl, what is going on with this political crisis in America and the lunacy of Joe Biden and his circus and sideshow?
Last time we talked was a week ago, and what a week it has been. First, we had the failed Trump assassination, and now we have this whole circus around DNC trying to get Biden to step. Well, they did. They got Biden to step down, but it was so obvious Biden didn't want to go. He was dragged screaming from from going for another term. But the fact is, if they're saying Joe Biden is unfit to run for another term, does that mean he's fit to be the president now? I mean, like if they have a problem with him to have a second term, he still have 6 months left. I mean, he potentially could do a lot of damage in those six. I mean, he already done a lot of damage, but he could do even more damage. Now he's very angry at being forced out by some of his supposed allies, including Obama. Everybody's pressuring him to go, and the way they did it is they leak it to the major news network. So everybody now knew Biden didn't want to go, but he was forced to go. I mean, it's very embarrassing. And people, I think there was a Twitter person, China handle on X. He made a very interesting observation. He said he thinks the reason Biden is fighting to stay in the presidency is really to cover for his son Hunter, because Hunter is going to be prosecuted for corruption if Trump becomes the president, and it's very telling that when everyone is telling Biden to go, Hunter is very, very much telling his dad to stay in place, stay the course, because his ass is on the line. And I think that's very logical. I mean, it makes total sense. Like what's this is just, and then all these liberals are coming out out in the open, making a complete ass of themselves, crying over Biden giving up his position. You had Van Jones crying on a major network. I mean, like, who are you kidding here? This is a performance. Everybody knows the performance. So why do you continue to embarrass yourself like that? There's a Chinese professor, an ethnic Chinese professor at MIT Sloan School of Management, by the name of Yasen Huang. I mean, his whole shtick since 2000 has been saying India is going to surpass China because India is a great democracy and China is not, right? I mean, 20 years later, he's still saying the same thing. He has a tweet. Let me find the tweet. I actually quote tweeted it. And he's just like Van Jones, man. Like Van Jones broke down on air. Yeah, but Yasen Huang wrote a tweet. He said, "I have not cried for years, but I'm crying uncontrollably now. I feel so proud of my adopted country that has a leader so selfless, so dedicated for the good of the country." I mean, are you kidding me? What's wrong with these people? What is wrong with you guys? Like, everyone knows Biden was forced out, and he didn't want to go, and they're still trying to concoct this fiction that Biden selflessly gave himself up for the country to have a better future. Are you kidding me? Obama have to step in and tell Biden, you have to step down. And this is another thing relate to what we talked about last time. U.S. go around the world lecturing people on democracy and freedom. And here we are, the president of the United States, the greatest democracy on earth, is being forced behind the closed door to have to step down, to have to give up his bid for re-election. Nobody voted on this, by the way. I mean, nobody's gonna vote for Biden anyway. But this is all done behind closed door, and they decided, Kamala Harris is gonna be our next candidate. Who voted for it? Besides all the Democrats, big shots, like all the guys manipulating behind the scene. And this is supposed to be a democracy. And I'm just curious how Hillary is feeling at this moment. When DNC chose Kamala Harris, right? And so this remains interesting. I'm gonna be interesting to see if Clinton is gonna make a bid to either for the VP position or to be on the cabinet of Harris again. This will be interesting.
I have something that I think about the situation. I believe that in some of the people that are the elite, they see that America's economy is going down the tube. They see her influence going down the tube. They're seeing her being challenged on every end. So I think the forcing out of Biden and the choosing of Harris was strategic, and I think because they are trying also to woo India away from the BRICS, and Kamala Harris is part Indian and she's part black, and I think it's just a more subtle way to tell Africa, look, we have a black woman. Tell Indian, hey, she's part Indian, and they can put a cooler face on imperial hubris, even though the shot callers are behind the scene, but the world will see her as America trying to rein in its imperial ambitions, when in reality she's just a puppet being moved by the puppeteers to try to buy a little more time for the empire. What do you have to say about that?
I just saw another tweet on X. Another Twitter. He's a Black Canadian guy, and he said, "Isn't it odd? All the supposed Black presidential candidates are trotting out, whether Kamala Harris or Obama, like their Black part of the heritage, all trace outside of the country. Their Black part of heritage is from somewhere else rather than African American. I mean, Kamala Harris' dad is from Jamaica, and and Obama's status on Kenya. What does that say? What kind of message are they sending here? It's like you're only going to be a black president if your parents are actually not American. I think you're onto something about Kamala, and they're playing off his Indian heritage, because now you have Trump's VP pick, J.D. Vance, who's married to an Indian American. They're also the Republican is also going after the Indian American vote. Because the Indian American, they're the up and coming. The new the brown is the new black, right? The Indian Americans are up and coming because they're fast growing ethnic group, and on average the Indian American household, they make highest income. They're like among the highest income learners. So the Republican is actively going after that demographic. Like they have been going after the Hispanic demographic. They're trying to chip it away from the Democratic coalition. So Kamala Harris will be the answer for that. It's like, okay, now he's not just a wife of a VP. He's going to be the president. You got to vote for her. I don't. But if you look at Kamala Harris, every time he's on camera, like she's like our auntie who is always high on the weed, like the way she talks. And if you look at her poll numbers back in 2020, she was polling a single digit in the Democratic primary back in 2020. She was just barely polling ahead of Andrew Yang. She was polling like 3.5%. And we all know the reason Biden chose her to be his VP is because she posed no threat to Biden. Biden don't have to worry about Kamala, because Kamala keep on talking about what has been. Let's focus on what has rather than what has. What the hell are you talking about? She was on television and say, "I am a black woman wearing a blue suit." Like, okay, thank you for stating the facts. But we all know, just like Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, if he is somehow got elected into the office of presidency, he's not a driver. She's not the driver. She's a rider on the bus. It's still the deep state that's keep running things. Nobody believes Biden is actually calling the shots, coordinating the U.S. grand strategy around the world, right? We know that it's a deep state that's running the show. And this is why they also want Kamala Harris to be the front person, because she is also the perfect candidate for the deep state. While she say all those vacuous things on air, they can keep on running the U.S. empire like they always do. But I don't know. I think, but in terms of election politics, I mean, the Democrats, they did what they have to do, because there's no way Biden would win versus Trump, especially after that failed Trump assassination. No matter what you say about Trump, I don't like Trump myself, but he played that assassination attempt perfectly. He knew how to work the media. When he was about to rush off the stage, he stopped them. He's like, "Hey, wait! This is my moment. This is my moment to pose." Then he did the fist pumping in the air and say, "Fight!" And then it was a perfect picture moment. It's everywhere in the media. So he got a huge boost from that. And Biden just comes off like this zombie who barely knows what he's talking about. So Biden has to go. And that's one advantage Kamala has. Kamala is actually, in her own words, unburdened by what has been, and so she can say, "Oh, I can, despite what I say is totally meaningless, at least I make coherent sentences, unlike Biden." Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Finish your thought.
And a lot of the hate lately has been focused on the person of Biden, because people calling him Genocide Joe for enabling the Israeli genocide on Gaza. in Gaza, whereas Kamala is mostly stay in the background, even though we know her politics is exactly the same. She's also like rah rah Israel. Israel
Mm-hmm.
could do no wrong, but she hasn't been at the forefront. So she's kind of shielded by the fact that she hasn't done anything. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what they got going for her. And then there are a lot of people who actively hate Trump. So they're still counting on the possibility that those people might turn out and vote Harris in. So go ahead, sorry.
No, this is actually you also. I'm about to play a clip. You were on RT and you gave your opinion on Harris, and I'm about to play this. And I was just saying, what a beautiful time to play this as we're talking about this. I got the clip and I saved it. I said, I got to play this when Carl is on. So, Carl, the people will get to hear your perspective on this a little deeper. So, I'm going to play this little clip.
Well, let's learn more with RT contributor Carl Zha now joining us bright and early on this 8 a.m. hour program live from Moscow. Very warm welcome to you, Carl. What do you think of this, mate? I mean, here we are, you and me, we're sitting back, we're watching this whole kind of crazy political circus in Washington. But what I wanted to ask you, does this circus in America make any difference for the dialogue that can be expected with partners in Washington? I mean, what is Beijing's expectations right now as they watch this ongoing circus?
I think Beijing is probably watching with amusement. I mean, they're waiting for the dust to settle in the US election. So far, we have a circus. We had a failed assassination of former President Donald Trump. And then we have Biden, despite his lack of mental capacity to stay in the presidency that everybody knows about, refused to step down, refused to give up his nomination, and he had to be pressured by members within his own party, including former President Obama, to withdraw his nomination. I mean, U.S. has nothing to lecture the world about democracy and and election. I mean, when everything is done in the backroom dealing, like we have seen this weekend, Biden did not want to go. Biden wants to seek renomination, yet his party's pressure him to step down. Everything has happened behind the back doors. It was minimum public input. What we have is people who poorly supported Joe Biden leak out the news to the press to put further pressure on him. Now, as for Kamala Harris is not a very popular candidate. She, in fact, during 2020 Democratic primary, Kamala Harris was polling single digits. She was polling like 3.5%, just barely above Andrew Yang. So the only reason that Biden became the president is because DNC didn't want Sanders to win. And the only reason Biden chose Kamala Harris because Kamala posed no threat to Biden. And now we are in another situation where the Democratic Party just want to shoe in this very unpopular, I would say, bad candidate to be their presidential nominee.
But Carl, the whole point was, sorry to jump in, but you remember Biden said a number of years ago, my VP is not only going to be a woman, she's going to be a black woman. I mean, he was talking like this, wasn't he? So, but she, her parents, I think her father's from the Caribbean, I think her mother's from India, but they like to call her an African American, which is entirely not true. But let me ask you about foreign policy, okay? Because America, okay, look, what about 750 military bases in about 80 countries worldwide right now? So a huge military footprint worldwide. When it comes to America's foreign policy, do you think it's only up to the guy or the girl in the Oval Office? Or do you think there's a power behind the throne, an incognito power behind the curtains that's directing America's foreign policy? What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't think anybody believes Biden is calling the shots. He lacks the mental capacity to do so. I mean, Biden is a perfect candidate for the deep state, and I don't think Kamala Harris will be any different. I mean, policy-wise, Kamala Harris is not significantly different from Biden. In fact, during the entire Biden presidency, Kamala Harris' appearance is more like a joke. I mean, every time he appears in public, she's high on drugs. How can we expect her to lead America into a different direction?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. And you're not alone with that sentiment, Carl. I mean, I've been speaking to former colleagues and friends in the United States, and they're all they're all kind of lost right now, and they all understand that the Democratic-run establishment has been lying to them. I mean, and now reactions coming in from around the world, because we've all known that Biden's been sick for a long time. Meantime, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Zaharova has suggested the next step should actually be an investigation into why the American political establishment previously tried to hide Biden's health issues. And that's as the U.S. mainstream media now says the president's decision has nothing to do with his health concerns. I mean, is it just me? I just can't believe the amount of BS that comes out of Washington these days. Do you think more people are waking up to the lies that keep coming out of those inside the Beltway?
Well, I mean, every time Biden shows up in public and make a speech, the problem is plain to see for everyone, everyone who is an observer of American politics. And Biden is objectively the worst U.S. president in the 21st century. I mean, during his watch, he actively supported the genocide Israel is carrying out in Palestine, and he's waging a proxy war in Ukraine that threatened to bring a possible nuclear war in the world in the 21st century. I mean, it's a good thing that he's gone, but Kamala Harris is not any better.
Yeah, I think it's a fair comment as well, Carl. I mean, look, I've run out of time here, but I just close this with a comment. The Dems want Biden gone now, but we still got 3+ months until November. My question will be, who's at the helm? Who's driving this ship right now, and who's going to be driving it for the next 3 months? Carl, next time we talk, we will assess that as well. RT contributor Carl Zha, always a pleasure. Thank you, mate.
And Carl, going back to Kamala Harris and the DNC, I do believe that it's a play not just to shore up support for the DNC, but as I say, I believe it is also to reach out to India a little bit to try to pull India into his orbit. Because remember when Donald Trump was president and he invited Modi to the United States, and they went to Texas, and there was a stadium full of people greeting Modi, who, I might add, is responsible for genocide also. People forget about this. Modi is responsible for genocide. So I think it's a two-part play, a play to shore up support for the DNC and the candidate, and I also believe it is also to try to show India, hey, look what we're doing. We're having a part Indian presidential candidate. How about you come and we will help you? Because a lot of people don't know that the United States and India also has I forget what it's called, but they have an agreement where the United States can use certain bases in India and vice versa. And I think all of this is done with China on the mind. I truly believe, I think this is, they are looking at China as the greatest threat, because China is a power all unto itself. It is self-sufficient, it's independent, it is not buying the stuff that the West is selling, and it is a non-white, non-Western nation that has now economically surpassed the United States, politically surpassed the United States, and with the next few months, I believe it will be militarily surpassing the United States, because it will have the largest army, the largest navy, and the largest air force in the world. And I think this is freaking the power structure in the West out. What do you have to say about that, Carl?
Well, I like to say India has always been the great white hope of the Anglosphere ever since 2000, since the rise of China is on the horizon. I mean, you look at articles from The Economist, from 2000 that has been saying, oh, India is going to surpass China because India has democracy and China is this authoritarian state. They have saying the same thing for 20 years, except now they're a little bit more explicit. Now you have YouTube videos, like popular channels saying, oh, India can counter China because India owns Andaman Islands, who guard the entrance to the strategic Malacca Strait. So if India chooses, they can help the U.S. to blockade the entrance to Malacca Strait, cut off the energy supply to China. I mean, this has always been the U.S. plan. The U.S. plan is to they try to do they're trying to do on another version of what they did with Soviet Union in the Cold War. They're Nixon went to China, and U.S. and China got together to oppose Soviet Union. So now they're like, okay, China is getting too big, but we can still work with India to counter China, because India at its present form is no threat to the U.S. hegemony. On the contrary, India in many ways complementary to the U.S. hegemony, because you have all the back offices, all the service centers that the West just outsourced to India, and the fact that Indian economy itself is not large enough to absorb all the talent that India produces. So the top echelon, the top elite tier of the Indian human capital, they come to the West. That's how we ended up with people like Kamala Harris' mom, and we have Vivek Ramaswamy's family, and J.D. Vance's wife's family. They all among this elite human capital in India who left India because there's the prospect is not so great at home, so they came to the West where the opportunity is greater. So this is where kind of this the Indian elite and the U.S. elite kind of work hand in hand. That's what happened with, for example, with Modi's financial backer, the Ambani family. Ambani recently they just throw a huge lavish wedding for their son. They invited all the top tier celebrities. Kardashian was there. I think Rihanna was there.
Justin Bieber.
Yeah, Justin Bieber, and they give everybody like $200,000 watches as a starter. And I mean, like this, all this wealth that Ambani was able to accrue, or part of it is their collaboration with Modi, their support for Modi. So and one of the manifestation was they kicked out TikTok from India. So because Ambani has ambition to dominate the Indian social media, so he worked with the Modi government to kick out TikTok on national security ground. The same ground that U.S. is trying to ban TikTok. And then what did he do? Ambani turned around and worked with Zuckerberg to form a joint venture. And this is the Geo. So Geo is really like a it's a wrapper around Facebook. But this allowed Ambani to cut in kind of right on the Facebook platform and have a monopoly in the social media space in India. And to do so, first had to kick out the TikTok, and also a lot of the Chinese companies, they pour a lot of investment actually in the Indian tech startups. And those Indian tech startups actually threatens monopolies like Ambani's family's holding. So they want to cut off the source of funding for these Indian tech startup. So they roll out legislation to ban Chinese investment in the Indian tech space. And so I mean you see similar things in US now. People are now complaining. Tencent have too much investment in, like, for example, in gaming. They own the Riot Games, so on and so forth. And so this is why there's kind of India at the present is more complementary to the U.S. hegemony than working counter to it. This is why they're more comfortable to work with India to counter China. Of course, eventually, if India do grow powerful enough, then U.S. then will do the same thing to India. John Mearsheimer was very explicit on his recent interview on Indian television when the host asked him, are we in a multipolar world? What about India? Is India also one of the great power? And John Mearsheimer told her, yes, we're in a multipolar world now, but India is not yet a great power. It's aspiring to be a great power. And And by the time if China ever decline, China ever collapse or whatever, and then India takes its place to be the emerging superpower in the global south, then United States for sure would counter India just like they're countering China, because the whole point of U.S. empire logic to stay to be the top dog. But for now, they feel they can play the Indian cards against China, and I'm sure like the Kamala Harris ties to India plays into that. Like Modi at one point was persona non grata in U.S. He was governor of Gujarat. He was banned explicitly from entering United States. But after he became elected, of course, the U.S. have to backtrack and give him visa. But U.S. elite has no problem with kind of the Hindu nationalism that Modi is promoting at home. Because he parallels their own. Modi's whole Modi platform is hating on the Muslims, right? And that fits you with the U.S. agenda perfectly. Hey, this is what the U.S. do. We're brothers. we can all hate Muslims together. And this is also like, this is why people are wondering why online there's a lot of support from India for Israel, because they see like Israel is a great ally on the Muslim world. And most of these people are invariably BJP supporters, because the Indian government actually have a cyber army of these trolls promoting their own domestic agendas. But a lot of the time on internet, it just looks like, they just look like trolls. It's not very effective. I think many times it runs counter what they are trying to achieve, which is for the betterment of the image of India abroad. So I think you're definitely onto something there. But on the other hand, I have to putting a caveat here. India is an aspiring great power, so they see themselves as should be one of the poles in the multipolar world, and so they don't want to be like the pliant proxy to the United States. That's not their goal. Is to make themselves a great power. Their goal is not to be a servant to the U.S. empire. So they will always ultimately to work to further India's own national interest, and they have more leeway than countries like South Korea or Japan, who are militarily occupied at the moment by the U.S. military. So India will try to pursue an independent strategy. This is why they still reselling Russian oil to Europe. A lot people, the imports of Russian oil and gas to India has skyrocketed in the past 2 years. And then if you look at the India's export of oil and gas to Europe, it also skyrocketed. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what's going on. And U.S. had chose largely looking the other way, because they still need, even though U.S. does not like it, U.S. have been publicly lecturing Indian diplomats in public all the time about they shouldn't work with Russia. But behind the closed door, they cut the India some slack, because they still need India on board of their China containment project. So this is what's going on. But India, they're still trying to profit from like the U.S.-China competition. It's like, okay, well, if we play our cards right, maybe we'll get more advanced tech transfer from United States, more investment from U.S. But we will continue to get cheap Russian oil, because we're not gonna. They're depending on that. So they are kind of uncomfortable ally for Washington. They're not 100% pliant, because they have their own interests, but for it just they have a convergent interest when it comes to China.
And I think that India has never gotten over the fact that prior to the '62 war, that they were in a slightly better economic position than China, and China not only surpassed them, they ran laps around them and built up industry, and they become an independent power. And on top of that, they lost the '62 war I mean, by a huge margin. And they can't get that out of their psyche. But it's crazy because they will work with the United States and they will work with the UK, and the UK colonized them and stole trillions of dollars from their economy, and they can get over that, but they can't make amends with a neighbor that you can't pick China up and put it somewhere else. They're your neighbor. It seems like to me they would be dashing to try to find a solution to the border crisis so that their economy can prosper, because a lot of people don't. China is India's largest trade partner. China also supplies almost all of the components that India uses to make drugs to sell to the rest of the world. So, and China is a huge investor in tech companies and infrastructure in India. So it would behoove the Indians to think rational and pull back from the hurt feelings of 62 and to work with their neighbor instead of plotting and planning with the United States, which they see everybody that gets close to the United States, what happens to them, and what Britain did to them. And do they ever just sit back and say, hey, the reason we had this spat with China is because we were occupied and they just left, and they left this McMahon line that China never accepted, and China told them that they never accepted it. I mean, I mean, to me, they are in a self-defeating circle if they do not analyze this the way it should be. What do you have to say about that, Carl?
So I just recently read an article. I forgot whether Economist or FT. I have to dig it up, but the gist of it is saying right now the Indian business community actually want Modi government to tone down the anti-China rhetoric because they want to do business with China. They see much more potential for growth with Chinese investment, with Chinese trade, and they don't want the border tensions to impact their business. Whereas the Indian public is going the other way because Indian media has been manipulating the news for decades. Now, a lot of the Indian public want Modi to go even more hardline because 70% of the Indians public right now surveyed say they believe India could win a war against China. That's how much brainwashing their media have been, playing tricks on them because they're not telling them the truth. I mean, because a lot of people, especially India has 1.4 billion people. There's a lot of many people who travel outside India. They're cosmopolitan, they're worldwide, and many of them have traveled to China. They have seen China firsthand, and they understand how everything is. But for the vast majority of the people in the country whose only exposure to China, to the outside world, is through their media. I mean, this is kind of like United States, actually. If you think the same argument can be said about United States, a lot of the people in U.S., they just don't know how it is. Only news they receive about China is from their very biased media, which completely manipulate the news, presenting a bizarre world of picture to the public. So the public's been led to believe that India could defeat China in wars. That's why India should be tougher on China than it currently is. And so this is but Modi government is not a neutral party in this because they're the ones who are instilling this belief in the public. They are the one who misleading the public. They're the one who's stoking nationalism in India. It's like the fundamental issue between India and China is it's a border issue. It's a border conflict that was a legacy of British colonialism.
Yes.
And it's something. It's not something that. It's something that could be easily solved by two sides sitting down and hammer out the border, like China has done with the other countries that's bordering China. I mean, China's had when People's Republic of China was founded in 1949, inherited border dispute all around its border. In the north, in the south, in the west, with everybody. But by 2000, China have settled all its land border dispute. I mean, China still have maritime border dispute in South China Sea and East China Sea, but on land, with all the countries border China on land, China have settled all the land border dispute, with the exception of India and Bhutan. And the case of Bhutan is because Bhutan's foreign policy
It's run by India.
being controlled by India. So you see the common denominator here. There's a common denominator here. And you know, China settled its border with Burma, with Vietnam, with Laos, with Russia, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Pakistan, you know, Nepal. China settled its border with everybody except India is the last one that's holding out, because India feels like we don't need to negotiate. We just tell you where the border is. You just accept it. But that's not how it works in negotiation. Negotiation is give and take. You can't just dictate. And so this is the border issue is one. But I think you are also right. Another point about this competition, so to speak, is the defeat in the war in 1962, and also the China's economic takeoff. Because I grew up in China in 1980s, and I remember back in 80s, the GDP per capita in India and China about the same. You know, sometimes some years India even pull ahead. You know, if the monsoon was really good that year, the India GDP per capita actually pulls ahead. It's only until 1990, after 1990, you know, when the Chinese economy really took off. And then you never look back. And you know, this is what I like to say is India actually have respectable GDP growth numbers. You know, it actually is doing better than many other countries in the developing world, in the global south. But unfortunately, they always compare India with China, which does not make India look good. That's the problem. You know, if you compare India's growth numbers to other countries in the global south, you know, it's respectable. India has been posting high growth numbers year after year. But when stack against China, it's kind of magnitude difference. I think this is why, you know, especially a lot of the people among the Indian elite, this is kind of hit on their ego. This hits the ego, because it's like, you know, we used to be the same neck to neck with China, and then Chinese economy is now 5 times the size of India. I mean, it's a big change in the last this happened in the last 30 years. And so this is a problem. This is a hard problem to solve, because as long as, like, this, you know, I'm tying back to U.S. again. You know, remember what Putin said about U.S. Putin says the problem with the U.S. is the mentality of hegemony. Unless the U.S. elite gave up on this hegemonic mindset, no matter who is the president, nothing is going to change. Well, with India, it's very similar when it comes to China. They kind of have to, give up this mentality that somehow they're superior than China. They should be better than China. They just work with China. You know, like both countries can profit and grow together. I mean, like they have to step away from like some kind of zero-sum mentality, like your loss is my gain. Whereas to the one where, hey, we can both gain, we can both profit, as long as there's peace, stability, and growth, and we can both grow our economy together and engage in trade. And right now, even despite Modi's rhetoric toward China, the Indian-China trade is still growing. It's already, like, China is already India's largest trading partner. It's getting bigger. It's getting bigger. They're just trying to limit now. They're just putting all kind of limit, clamping down on the China trade, but it's still growing because the Indian businessmen see opportunities in trade with China. That's why they want the government to just cool off a little bit, just like, you know, cool off the temperature a little bit. But India, there's a lot of things at play, because Modi, his party need to stoke the public sentiment. He need to stoke the nationalism in India to stay in power. Like
Mhm.
he got to show I'm the tough guy. I can put China in its place, and I am now aligned with United States. We're going places. That's how he's selling the message to the public. So this is going to be a persistent issue for foreseeable future. I'm afraid. I mean, it's really unfortunate because China and India working together have so much more potential. Together they compose, like almost almost half of the world's humanity.
Mhm.
Like between China and
Almost three
India together.
billion people.
Yeah.
And Carl, we also forgot about Nikki Haley, another U.S. Indian elite. And also remember that there were British holdovers that are in power, just like in Pakistan, they're in power in India. And my friend here, shout out to Mr. Freeze, Lord Freeze. That's my guy. I actually know him personally. That's my high school friend all the way up. And he says, question, why hasn't India broken away from the US like China broke
Mhm.
away from the British to become independent in terms of the economy and the infrastructure?
This is a very good question because India they try to go on their own, after independence. This is why they kind of lean towards Soviet Union, and Nehru talked about building a socialist economy in India. But what happened is that got kind of mired down in bureaucracy and corruption. And then in 1991, that's when India decided to make a big reform. And when they talk about reform, it's they're opening the market, but the way they did it is kind of a turn toward liberalized economy. But we're talking about the liberal free market economy. But they're doing it with Indian characteristics. So they're not completely open. There's still a lot of restrictions on foreign capitals entering into India, for example, because they want to protect domestic industry correctly. Well, that's a correct instinct, but there's still a lot of red tape. So what ended up happening is India economy, even though they opened up and even though they still have a lot of protections, it became more and more dependent on the West. If you look at service sector, for example, that's one of this big growth sector in India that everybody talk how wonderful it is, the growth industry, the software, etc. But if you look at these industries, most of them depend on the West. It's so because they have the Western country outsource their IT needs to India. That's what all the back office work, all the service centers, that kind of stuff. I mean, but they haven't had. I mean, maybe this will still happen, but there needs to be like a homegrown Indian solution for Indian economy. Like this is what China did. China built a great firewall. So no Zuckerberg. and you know what happened past week? That CrowdStrike, that very shady cybersecurity firm, pushed a forced security update on a Friday that brought down the world's IT infrastructure, including India, US, Europe, you name it. All the airlines were paralyzed because their windows just froze. They got the big blue screen of death. And this had no impact in China because China, they're not running that software. They're not, even if they do have Windows, they're not using the CrowdStrike. They're not using CrowdStrike as the cybersecurity for antivirus. And by the way, that was very shady because CrowdStrike, they are the originator of the Russia Gate hoax. They're the ones who remember this. That's when Hillary's email got leaked to Wikipedia, and then they claim, because DNC got hacked. DNC server got hacked by Russia. And the originator of that lie is a CrowdStrike. And CrowdStrike, they later when the FBI contacted them, they're like, no, sorry, we can't give you the evidence. It's all we cannot. It's top security, and they did not reveal the fact that at that time CrowdStrike in fact worked for the Clinton. They were hired by the Clinton, and what did they? And CrowdStrike also behind the claim, behind the big North Korean, the claim that North Korea hacked Sony to in revenge for that Sony movie about North Korea.
Yeah.
It's also CrowdStrike, and the CrowdStrike's going around. So they are embedded with the U.S. intelligence services, and then they go around to tell all these big corporations, you have to buy our software, you have to buy our services for cybersecurity, because the dangers posed by hacking from Russia, from China, from Iran, from North Korea. But don't worry, we will protect you. And guess what? Then what did they do? They brought down the whole globe with them. And they did that because they have a very people were looking into it. What happened? So supposedly they had a very basic, a very common mistake, a null pointer written in C++, which is an ancient language, and but it's a language that's written for drivers, for Microsoft, and the okay. So the first problem is the CrowdStrike. They install this antivirus, like cybersecurity software on your computer, which means they're monitoring all the traffic that's coming to your computer to supposedly block out all the malware and virus and stuff. Which means they have admin privileges. And so what happens? So it's like, okay, so they're like, we're the guard dog. Well, who is watching the guard dog? Who is guarding the guard dog? I mean, they can do whatever they want on your computer. So their software had admin privileges, root access. First of all, they have kernel access, and then they have this automatic update, which you cannot say no because it's a forced software update. Yep. It's not even like an update. You can say, "Oh, I want this." Yes, no. You don't get the option. They push it. It's a forced update on all the systems, and then those bright big brains at CrowdStrike decided to do it on a Friday morning. I worked as a deployment engineer for a while, so I know the last thing you want to do as a deployment engineer is deploy it on Friday, because you know what? If something screws up, you are giving everybody an early weekend, and your weekend is screwed. You're going to work your ass off the rest of the weekend trying to patch up the problem. You don't want to do deploying on Friday if you can't help it. And so they have, and by the way, CrowdStrike, guess where they outsource a lot of work to? India. They outsource a lot of their work in India. So they had this null pointer error, which could easily be catched. Very common, if you just do a if condition. If this thing is null, then don't do anything. This is a very common mistake in computer programming. But their dev team somehow failed to catch that. But that's fine. They could have like an automatic software to scan for those kind of things, scanning your software for this kind of mistake. They didn't do that, but that's fine. You still, mistake happens, but you don't push your software without testing to the production environment. That's like, this is why most people have set up a staging environment where your environment totally mimics the production. You deploy your code there first, you test it, you're satisfied, then you push to production. You don't go this gonzo cowboy. It's like, no problem with my code. I'm gonna go push this to production on a Friday across the globe, across the entire world, all the Microsoft systems. This is what they did, and after this huge screw up, when their CEO was interviewed, they say, "Well, we're looking into this. This is not a cyber attack. This is not a this only impacted the Microsoft platform. We ask the people that have issues, contact our customer service, we'll sort. It's like, you just caused a global IT infrastructure meltdown. Airlines were grounded because they couldn't get on their terminal, Microsoft. And you can just say, oh, it only affects the Microsoft Windows system. Are you kidding me? And this guy, this is like the perfect encapsulation of the U.S. empire. It's grift, corruption, incompetence, and stupidity,
and exploitation.
And the grift is where they work with the U.S. intelligence services to hype up all these cyber threats from Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, to get everybody to buy their software and browbeat everybody to buy their software and services. And the incompetence, pushing untested code out on Friday across the globe, and the stupidity is, of course, the whole stupid simple. It's such a untested software. I mean, anyway, I'm ranting because this is kind of my background. I work in IT. This is how the U.S. empire is being run: grift, incompetence, stupidity. And this is why U.S. empire is in decline, because everybody knows this is not sustainable. Whereas China got out scotch-free because they built their own IT stack completely from scratch. And they had the Great Firewall starting from 2009. They block out Zuckerberg. So now Chinese, they have their own super app. They have, instead of Instagram, Facebook, they just have and X. They just have WeChat. They have their own, instead of YouTube, they have Bilibili, and WeChat is super. Like when I was in China in 2019, you don't need a separate app for taxi. You don't need a separate Uber app. You just use your WeChat. Their WeChat is integrated with their version of Uber, Didi, and you can use WeChat to pay everything. You can order taxi, order food, talk to your friend. It's also like WhatsApp. It's a messaging service. So it's like all the apps roll into one. And they're completely unaffected by the stupid cyber CrowdStrike that was protect people from China, right? And so this is the irony. And before I got on, how did we get off? I'm sorry, I got off on tangent.
Carl is off the chain. Hey, I'm Sam Blue. This is live. So you're asking, this really live? Yeah, this is really live. And you have another question down at the bottom. You said he should take questions from the chat if it is actually live. It can start a super chat culture. Well, this is. I thank you for that statement. But on my channel, if you want to super chat, just super chat. You don't, and I would really appreciate it. But you don't have to super chat for your question to be answered. I'll put it up on the screen if I get to it. I don't charge people for information or whatever like that. I really appreciate that you guys give us your time. And like I said, anything helps. If you want to super chat, that's cool, but it's not mandatory like other people do that to pick up a question. I'm not trying to hustle anybody. I'm trying to get the truth out. And if you see the cause is good, then you super chat. We have Speaking the Truth. Shout out, thank you for the donation, for the super chat. I really appreciate it. Cosmo Ray says this India likes to show off again. That goes back to what Carl said about it's similar to the United States in this stuff. But Carl, I wanna go to something real quick, a little clip here, and I want your perspective on this after this clip. Okay, it's a short clip, and I have a whole bunch of them because I didn't know what I wanted to ask you because there were so many things that are going on in the South China Sea and Central Asia that pertains to China and the United States. So I just put up a few different ones just in case. So I want to play this one particularly for you right here.
This is part of a broader policy of decoupling from China, which is absolutely insane. even today, you had 5 major Chinese state companies, petro and chemical companies, announcing they're going to delist from the U.S. stock exchange. You had the U.S. coerce Latvia and Estonia into breaking off of the Central and Eastern Europe-China agreements. The idea of decoupling from China is even more insane and suicidal than the suicidal sanctions against Russia, which everybody now knows are doing far, far more damage to the Western economies and devastating damage to the global South than it is to Russia and China. This is a Malthusian green policy in the West of self-destruction, of depopulation, of deindustrialization. And the sanctions policies, which supposedly are over geopolitics, actually go hand in hand with the self-destructive Green New Deal in the West, which is it's just leading towards a global hyperinflationary collapse of the Western financial system, the dollar-based system, and can only be seen as suicidal and has to be reformed.
So, what is your take on what he was talking about? The decoupling, the U.S. and the West trying to decouple from China, the U.S. Putting pressure on European nations to force China's companies out of tech investment and 5 and 6G technology, and it's to those nations' detriment, and yet they will bow to the U.S. dictates, and like the European Union stated the other day that they see China as a threat, and that they are against their interests, and that the now the South China Sea and Asia has become the focal point, and that the EU will not hesitate to act upon its own morals. We know that was the United States behind the scenes, but what have you to say about that stuff?
Yeah, I saw Ursula von der Leyen's speech in EU about how he vowed to stop China from invading Taiwan. Well, first of all, you and what army? I mean, Ursula, you are the president of EU Commission. You command no army, no air force, no navy. I mean, what authority do you have to stop China? Actually, I don't even know what her job is. I mean, other than acting as a spokesperson for Washington in Europe, what does she do exactly? I mean, people in the comments were saying she facilitates. She's a facilitator. But I mean, come on, like you can post all day. I mean, she went to like a Finnish nuclear bunker, you know, talking about security for Europe. What do you do, Ursula? What in it? Like all she does is demonstrate to Washington, I am your reliable, loyal vassal to do whatever to pursue your interests on behalf of Washington, rather on behalf of the European interests. That's what she's really signaling. But EU, are you kidding me? Like, I mean, they're not even NATO. EU is not even NATO. Like, what's EU gonna do? And about decoupling, I think I talked about this last time. There was a clip surfaced by the former Trump U.S. under the former Trump administration. She was a U.S. ambassador to NATO. I think her name is Kay Hutchinson, and she talked about China. She said, "Well, U.S. greatest strength is our economy. You know, China may have a big army, their navy is growing, we know they have nuclear weapon, but what if they're starting to break down internally? What if they suffer internal problems? Our best leverage is to cause a collapse of China's economy." I mean, she's publicly talking about this. This is just to bring harm to 1.4 billion people, just so U.S. can remain the top dog in the world. But this is what she's just speaking out aloud. She's just like, these things are not supposed to be voiced in the polite company, but she's just speaking out loud like Trump usually do. And this is what they think. And the problem with the U.S. elite at this point is just like the 71% of the Indian public who believe that India could win a war against China. These U.S. elites starting to imbibe their own propaganda. They're starting to believe their own propaganda. And so now they really believe, oh, it's easy. Chinese growth is all because this is what they believe. They believe the only reason China got to where it is today is because of West. Because we let them make toys for us, make us toys and shoes. This is how they got where they are today. And if we're just going to cut that off, they're going to go back to Stone Ages. That's what they believe. It's so cut off from the reality. China, like now they have driverless taxi in Chinese cities. You think somehow, and actually a lot of people don't even realize export as a percentage of GDP in China has been declining ever since 2013. I mean, now it's a single digit a component of the Chinese GDP, because China has been growing its own consumer economy, because China, like United States, is a continental size economy. They have a lot, and they have a lot more people, and they have a lot more demand. Whereas when I grew up in China in 1980s, everything had to be imported. China have to import everything from radio to fertilizer. We use like Japanese made transistor radio, and because China produced crude oil at that time. China is an exporter of crude oil, if people could believe it, because China would export crude oil, and in return getting refined gasoline and plastics and and fertilizers, all those petrochemical products, because China at that time didn't have enough refineries to refine its own crude oil. So China would export its crude oil to Japan and then get him back. It's like China was exporting raw commodities and buying manufacturing goods. What really happened is the substitution, import substitution. So while China was making all these goods for export to the other countries, they're also making goods for themselves. So in the 1980s, our first TV, our first color TV was a Japanese, I think it was Sony, and our first refrigerator was also a Japanese refrigerator. Not because we were not patriotic. It's because at that time, China, in the early 80s, China did not produce color TV. It did not produce refrigerator. China only started to produce refrigerator in 1986, after we have already bought our refrigerator. So what happened is, as the year progressed, as China is learning to make goods for the West, they're also learning to make goods for themselves. So they no longer rely on imports from abroad. And now China has 1.4 billion consumers. They have a huge consumer economy. And now the Chinese EV revolution is driven primarily by the internal market. Like all the Western politicians upping arms about Chinese EV exports. But the fact is, the Chinese EVs, 90% of the Chinese brands EVs were sold inside China. And the rest of the 10%, mostly they're not going to US or Europe, because Biden is slapping on like 300% tariff. Most of them are going to global South countries like Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia. They're going. Some of them may make it to Australia and Europe, but most of them go to places like Brazil and Mexico. And the Biden tariff hit the hardest is Tesla. They hit Tesla because Tesla makes their cars in Shanghai, in the Shanghai Gigafactory. So most of the so-called Chinese EV exports to the Western market are the likes of Tesla and the likes of Volkswagen. They're through their joint ventures in China. They're making those cars. Now they're exporting back to their home market. So they're the ones taking the hit. The BYD, they're like, we're selling to Indonesia, we're selling to Mexico. Your 300% tariff doesn't affect us. But the people in Washington, because they believe their own propaganda, they think, okay, all they got to do is cut off the ties with the Chinese economy. The whole goal of decoupling is so that when there's a war break out between China and United States, they don't have to worry about backlash and collateral damage because it's the intertwining economic ties. So their goal is like, okay, well, yeah, the problem obviously is because we're like joining at the hips. So we're just gonna separate them. They get, if they're a Siamese twin, we're just gonna cut them in half. And yeah, that would totally work. That totally work. and then we can wage war against China. That's the whole Pentagon plan. But nobody is calling them out on this. This is like your plan is fundamentally flawed. When even Lockheed Martin, CEO of Lockheed Martin, has come out and said, yes, we do rely on the component source from China. We do not expect decoupling to happen 100% because we do need component source from China. The U.S. military-industrial complex today, as right now, would ground to a standstill if they do a complete decoupling today. They're gonna take them years trying to find alternative source and trying to build the domestic capability. So yeah, a lot of this decoupling just crazy talk by people who don't really understand the economy and don't really understand how the world works. And just so happen those same people are in the seats of power in Washington. They have no idea. They have no idea how the real economy is wrong. Because they probably don't even do their own shopping, right? I mean, they don't realize how many things are made in China. So this is a problem.
Shout out to Trid from Romania. Thank you for watching us and giving your time. We really appreciate it. Also, let me make a little note. Don't forget, since they say that China is behind the West, China has the fastest supercomputers in the world now. So you have to look at that also. So that shows you the ingenuity, the independence, and the growth of China. Also, I wanted to get back. While we were talking about how China used to export raw materials and then get back refined goods. This is one of the things that's pissing the U.S. and the West off, because China is in Africa helping the African nations to do the same thing now. Switch from just sending your raw goods to Europe and the United States, and China is setting up plants to refine those so that these governments can make more money, so that they can invest more in healthcare and more in all kind of upgrades in the budget, in school and everything else. And I think that is one of the things that has pissed the United States off, because they were able to exploit that because those nations didn't have the refining capabilities or the factories to modify or to build certain things. And China has put a lot of that stuff there. So people say China is the manufacturer to the world. They forget that China has helped Africa to become the manufacturer to China. They don't say anything about that. And why do you think that they leave that out?
Well, it's inconvenient, Rashid. It's inconvenient truth. This happened in Southeast Asia as well. For example, Indonesia, they have a lot of natural resources like nickel, cobalt that's needed for powering the electric transition. But they don't want to just export raw materials and then getting batteries in return. So China is actually pouring investment to help setting factories in Indonesia to process their nickels, their cobalt. And the question really is, why United States complain about China's Belt and Road Initiative all the time? The question is, what are you offering? If you're complaining about China, what do you do? Why can't you do what China does, right? But that's not how they work. Because the Wall Street people, they run the numbers. They're like, nah, that doesn't justify all the effort. That's not enough profit margin for us. I'm sorry, right? But whereas China, they look at the long term. They're not looking at the quarterly earning reports. They're not looking at the stock price for this quarter. That's what what the drivers in the West. In the West, you have to remember all the smart people. They all went to finance because that's where the money is. That's where you get most pay, and they just tried. All the smartest people in the West right now are working on how to game the market. How to game the stock market, and everything is short term thinking. Whereas in China, they plan out for the future. They have 5-year plan, 10-year plans, and they actually carry it out. They actually implement what they said they're gonna do. And unlike U.S. politicians, they will say one thing and they will, like in case of Joe Biden, he will forget about it the next day or next. and then you have people like Trump. They will promise the moon, and of course they will not deliver. But China will actually do what they said that they set out to do. That's a different. And people that's why there's a huge gulf of perception of China in the global South countries versus the West, because the West, they always talk to themselves like international community. We, the international community. No, you're not the international community. Now, when 80% of the world population lives outside of your so-called international community, and most of the world population, they see China a lot more positively than U.S. and the European vassal states views China. And this is why, because the U.S. sees China as competition. They're moving into this, like they have been exploiting the global South very comfortably for centuries, right? And now China, all these Chinese investments, that means that those African countries don't have to go hats in hand to IMF and World Bank anymore, and that's unacceptable to them. For them, that's zero sum.
Yeah, I want to play this clip here, and I want you to give me your take on it afterwards. It's a short clip. It's about 2 minutes, so I'm going to play it.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't have any great expectations of good developments taking place in the United States. I wish I could say the opposite. I've got no opposition to the people of the United States. For example, in things such as opposition to the Vietnam War, when I first came into politics, I cooperated with many people in the United States. So I have nothing against ordinary Americans, whatever. But what is the case here is that the United States is trying to impose positions on the world which are not in the interests of the people of the world. It means that, for example, the United States is creating a higher price for oil. It's trying to, if you take China, where I'm obviously involved because I'm, working in Chinese university, it's trying to make people pay more for 5G by banning Huawei. It's trying to exclude Chinese companies from participating in the development of renewable energy, solar energy, and other windmills and other things. And this is against the interests of the world. So we have a situation of, obviously Iran has to pursue its own national interests. There's no problem about that. The United States pursues its own national interests also. But the point is that the national interests of Iran correspond with the general international interests of the population of the world, and the United States are against them. And that's why a very pleasant and good news about Iran's oil exports corresponds to that. It means the majority of the world's population doesn't want to go along with the US. They don't necessarily support Iran, they don't necessarily support China, which I'm involved with, but they don't want to be involved in the sanctions policy and the unilateral actions of the United States. So that's why Iran's oil exports have expanded.
Before you comment on that, I want you to make a mental note of what he was saying, because I have a 1 and 24-second clip that I wanted to follow that up with, because it is very important that we hear these clips, because you see, everybody is starting to recognize that the United States is lashing out because it is no longer the dominant power, and it sees a non-white, non-Western nation as its greatest threat. But I want to play this clip here. And this is very important. I think, where is it? Right here. I believe this is the one.
Well, because it's losing in peaceful economic competition. The United States claims its economy is dynamic, etc., but the real reality is that it's losing in the competition to China. I mean, if we take the situation in the pandemic, since the beginning of the pandemic, in the 3 years of the pandemic, China's economy grew 2.5 times as fast as the United States. China grew over 13%, the US just over 5%. If you take the addition to world GDP in this period, it's 36% to China and about 16% to the United States. Then if you look at the individual companies, the US can't compete in telecommunications with Huawei. TikTok has become the most popular, so therefore the US is trying to ban Huawei. TikTok has become the most visited website in the world, so the US is now considering banning TikTok. Hikvision is the best producer of cameras for surveillance, etc. I mean, for safety surveillance in the world. So the US can't compete with that. The US admits that the whole solar power industry is totally dominated by China. The US is losing in peaceful economic competition. The only place in which it maintains a lead is military, because it spends more than the next 9 countries in the world put together. So therefore increasingly tends to try to put things on a military terrain. And this is very, very dangerous, because the world wants to get on with peaceful development, but the US wants to move things more and more towards military actions.
So on an equal playing field, we see that China is not just catching up with America, it has lapped America. And when you look at the true size of the GDP, China has the largest economy in the world when measured by what the CIA and the IMF measures, which is purchasing power parity. And the Chinese surpassed the United States in purchasing power parity in 2015. It was reported on CBS, ABC, NBC. I have the clips on my computer. China surpassed it. Do you believe that because they have been so dominant, and because they've had the advantage in technology, and had the advantage in military, and had the advantage in the bully pulpit, which is the media, and also had the advantage because at one time the dollar was the unquestioned world reserve currency? Do you believe now that the empire sees all of that tumbling down and they look at China as the greatest threat? Do you believe that it is skewing their vision, and they are lashing out because China is a non-white, non-Western nation?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, they have themselves has said that. The former Trump national security advisor said that. She said because China is not Caucasian, and the fact that but the problem is they still think they can reverse that process. They think, okay, we can if we just concentrate our power, which right now it's mostly in the military, to contain China, what they're doing is they're already waging an economic war against China. And like all these sanctions, they're now Blinken just now threatening more sanction against China because China continued to trade with Russia. These are just excuses. Their sanction on Russia is just a blueprint for their planned sanction against China, and the goal has always been economic strangulation. So China, the goal is to collapse the Chinese economy, like they said. So China no longer poses threat to the top dog position of the United States. But that's not going to work. I mean, they try that with Russia, it's not going to work. If they try with China, that will end disastrously for the United States. But the problem is these people are out of touch with reality. They're out of touch with even average reality of average working class Americans. They think they still... Right now, what U.S. is trying to do, even when they're trying to say, okay, we just got to bring the manufacturing back to the United States, et cetera, they're just going for military Keynesianism. They're like, okay, you know what? We are still strong in our military, so we're going to just put even more money into the military industrial complex. We're going to give more money to Lockheed Martin, to Boeing. What a great job Boeing has been doing lately, huh? And then they're and that's not gonna work, man. That's what they have. They're just doubling down on what they actually have been doing for past decades. They're like, okay, well, since only industry we have right now is building weapons, then we're just gonna build more weapons. Yeah, that's really gonna help. I mean, what U.S. working classes really need is they okay, so if you work for those industry, maybe shipbuilding, you work in shipyard, okay, maybe you will see some tangible benefit. But even there, US have outsourced its shipbuilding to East Asia a long time ago, since the 70s. Now the US Navy has to go to South Korea and Japan for help for naval buildup, because majority of the world's shipbuilding now is in East Asia. 50% of them in China, and the rest, the other is in South Korea or in Japan. And this is the problem. The problem is that the people who live in the Beltway bubble, they don't really know what's going on inside their own country. Let alone what's happening in China. They really think they can still pull this off, but it's not going to work. We all know it's not going to work.
I'm gonna play one more clip for you, and because I know you're on diaper duty.
my eldest 3-year-old just came up here and to look for me.
I understand. I'm gonna play this clip, and I want you to give me your take on this, and we'll wrap it up after that. So I want you to pay close attention to this.
Well, I
this
think
is 1
the
minute.
idea of de-dollarization is one which is going to be necessary. You have two aspects to it. One is the efforts of the United States to dictate the rules of trade and currency to all nations, which is the basis of the dollar system or the petrodollar system, is no longer valid. This was a neo-colonial system that was imposed largely through the military force of the United States and NATO, regime change, for example, against Gaddafi, the attempt to overthrow the Assad government, the Iraq attack, and now the Ukraine war, so to try to weaken Russia. But it's not going to work. Many countries around the world, especially in the so-called global south, are now moving out from under this so-called rules-based order. And this new deal between France and China is an example of that. You also had the Chinese involvement in the rapprochement between Syria and Iran. I'm sorry, Saudi Arabia and Iran. We also see trade going between India and Russia with a ruble-rupiah transaction basis. So we're in an era where the unipolar order doesn't function. And we see it with the collapse of the banks in the United States, the collapse of the Swiss giant Credit Suisse, the toppling, or the teetering, I should say, of the Deutsche Bank. So we're moving into a new era in which the emphasis will be on multilateralism rather than rule by one unipolar power.
That sums up the dollar-based system pretty good. What do you say about the miscalculations? Because that's what we're seeing right now. Multiple miscalculations by Western leaders when concerning Russia, Iran, South Africa, and especially China. They believe that because the Chinese have been patient, have been quiet, does not indulge in all of that talk of war and braggadocious talk. They believe that somehow they have cowered them, and I think that is a miscalculation because someone told me a while ago that when the Chinese get started, it's hard to get them off of you, to stop them when it's war. We saw that in the 1962 war. New Delhi is still there because the Chinese put restraints on themselves and pulled back, but they could have went to New Delhi if they wanted to. So do you believe that because America is losing her position, her dollar, which is the number one instrument of power for the military and for the empire, do you believe that is why she is really focusing on China? Because she sees China as the one nation that can supplant her militarily, politically, and economically?
They're really worried about China in the Middle East. I mean, back in 2000, so Alan Greenspan in his memoir about Iraq War, he already said United States didn't go to Iraq to grab the oil. They went to Iraq to dictate the flow of the oil, because even back in early 2000, China already industrialized, and U.S. itself is becoming more self-sufficient in oil and gas, whereas China was becoming the largest importer of oil and gas from Middle East. So they wanted to control the Iraqi oil. They saw the Chinese company was already going to Iraq, setting up oil exploration. So they want to put a stop to that, and also to defend the status of petrodollar, because one of the basis of petrodollar is Saudi trade oil in dollar. So then anybody who needs oil needs U.S. dollars. And that worked also for United States, because back then a lot of those dollars get recycled back into the U.S. economy, because before 70s, U.S. was still an industrial power. So a lot of the money the Saudi used to purchase, United States used to purchase oil, U.S. dollars. Saudi turned around and used those dollars to buy manufactured goods from U.S. So a lot of this money actually cycled back to the U.S. economy. And now they see the circulation going the other way. And Saudis, China is purchasing oil from Middle East, and then Middle East turn around, use the money to buy Chinese manufactured goods. And what they're really scared of is now if everybody agreed to switch from petrodollar to petro yuan, then all this money now trillions of dollars going to cycle through the Chinese economy to even make Chinese economy even more powerful, supercharge it, rather than park all that dollars in U.S. treasuries. and this is what U.S. wants to do. They want all the dollars to come back to the U.S. treasuries. So this is one of the U.S. grand strategy in Middle East is to divide and conquer, to encourage the division between the Sunni world led by Saudi Arabia and Iran. And this is why they're trying to broker a peace between Sunni Arab countries and Israel. This was started with Jared Kushner under Trump in the Abraham Accord, and what Biden is trying to do not Biden. Sorry, Biden doesn't do anything. what Jake Sullivan, Biden's security advisor, is trying to do, national security advisor is trying to get Saudi and Israel to normalize relationship. And if that had happened, it would completely marginalize Palestinians, because with all these Arab and Muslim countries now recognizing Israel as a legitimate entity. But October 7th completely changed that. After October 7th, no Arab Muslim majority countries are going to come and stand. Oh, we're going to normalize relationship with Israel. I'm going to recognize Israel at this point. No country can afford to do that now. Palestinian issue now is back on the forefront, center stage, and this is what United States is worried about. That's why they have some ridiculous segment on CNN saying anti-Semitism is on the rise in China. They're supporting the Palestinian cause in China. Totally unacceptable. They're panicking. They're panicking because the whole U.S. grand strategy in Middle East is in shambles. They're still pushing. They're still trying to put. I just saw an article in the Cradle, which reports on Middle East. They said Jordan was being pushed by the United States to trying to stop the Palestinian reconciliation talk in Beijing, because Hamas and the Palestinian Authority was supposed to have another meeting in Beijing at the end of the last month. But Jordan interceded on behalf of the United States and tell the Palestinian Authority President Abbas, said, don't do this. Don't go to Beijing. And so the United States is still trying to do this, but I don't think this. I mean, they're going against the trend of history now. They're on the wrong side of history, and I have full confidence that they're not going to succeed. The people in the Arab countries, they have seen the tremendous amount of damage that the United States have brought on their people, and there's no United States is nobody sees United States as a neutral, honest broker in Middle East conflict. It's one of the instigators. The Biden administration continued to be the main backer of Israeli genocide in Gaza. So, and Saudi Arabia, they traditionally rely on United States for security guarantees, but they now see which way the wind is blowing. This is why the Saudi-Iran peace deal happened in the first place. Right? They know it's not going to be the path the U.S. had laid out for them. That might not work out in the long run. They're looking for alternatives, and China offers that viable alternative.
And Carl, I'm gonna let you go because I know that you have diaper duty. But on our next show that you and I do together, when we started off, I want to ask you. I have something on my mind about what just took place with the Israeli bombing in Yemen. And I want to bring up a map, and I want to bring something to your attention, and I want to get your insight on it because I think it's very important. So we got to do this very soon again, Carl.
Oh yeah. I look forward to it. I mean, Israel have tried to widen this conflict ever. They have always tried to bring the conflict outside of the border of what Israel currently controls, because their whole goal has been dragging the United States deeper and deeper into this, and right now it doesn't look like the U.S. leadership have any alternative vision, either Harris or Trump. They're both 100% Israel supporters. So this insane policy is going to continue. The situation in Middle East is going to continue to escalate, and Israel is not doing itself any favors by going on war path and also continuously posting their war crime on social media. I mean, this is all going to be further evidence saved later for genocide trial. So I look forward to our next conversation. But thank you again, Rashid, for having me. Thank you for Rashid's family. I remember.
Yeah.
Shout out to Rashid's family. Yeah.
Be blessed. Take care of that beautiful new baby of yours, man. Give my love to your family and be safe, my brother.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. Everybody, thank you. Please hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Let me say that again. Do not forget to subscribe, like, and share because we're going up against the algorithm. We're going up against YouTube unsubscribing people. So I would really need you guys to do that and join us on Twitter, join us on Patreon, become a channel member, join us on the Red Pill Diaries, the Red Pill Journals, Locals. That's the empowerment of truth.locals.com. Join us on Rumble. Join us on Odyssey. We'd like to thank each and every one of you for giving us your time because we know that time is the most precious commodity that you could ever have because it's an unrenewable resource. So we hope that while you have spent your time with us, the return is an equal or greater satisfaction that you have gained. On that note, know that I go out the same way that I always come in with love in my heart for each and every one of you who loves truth. But know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. And remember this, do good to others, not because you want to be seen, but do good to others because it is the right thing to do. And when nobody else is looking, always remember, God is watching. On that note, I go out like that. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Deuces, everybody. I love you and thank you all. We're out of here. Peace.